So now we are going to talk about the basal ganglia. But first, we will differentiate the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. So the key difference between the two is that the basal ganglia are found deep within the cerebral hemispheres, while cerebellum is found below the bones attached to the bottom of the brain, as you can see in the photo. So what is the basal ganglia?
So the word ganglion means a grey matter mass, which as we know is formed by collections of neuronal cell bodies. These masses of grey matter are located deep in the central nervous system, in the inferior part of the cerebral hemispheres, lateral to the thalamus. Now on to the individual elements of the basal ganglia. First up, let's talk about the corpus striatum. The corpus striatum is a bilateral collection of three grey matter nuclei found in the inferior cerebral cortex. It is formed by the putamen and the globus pallidus, which together form the lentiform nucleus, and the caudate nucleus. The corpus striatum literally translates to stripy body, and if you look at a horizontal section through the brain, you can see why. All three nuclei forming the corpus striatum have a striated appearance due to the strands of grey matter passing through the internal capsule from the caudate nucleus to the putamen. Now let's look at some of the finer details of each individual nucleus, beginning with the caudate nucleus. This long and lanky C-shaped structure can be divided into three parts: a head, body, and tail, which terminates at the amygdaloid body, which is not part of the caudate nucleus. You can quite easily orientate yourself because the head is the anteriormost portion of the structure. The caudate nucleus is perhaps one of the most critical members of the basal ganglia due to the long list of critical functions it holds. Firstly, it plays an important role in controlling the speed and accuracy of directed or voluntary movements. It's also involved in what's known as executive function, which means that it helps guide our brain through decision-making processes related to focus and attention. This structure has an important role in reward and reinforcement. It is a system involved in associated learning, where an action becomes linked to a certain response. Studies have also linked the caudate nucleus to our emotions, notably our responses to visual beauty and attraction.
This video is not
So the video actually sums up the parts of the basal ganglia, but I will explain it further. So what makes up the basal ganglia? Number one is the caudate nucleus. As you can see here in the picture, this is the caudate nucleus. So the plural of it is caudate nuclei. It is a C-shaped subcortical structure which lies deep inside the brain near the thalamus. It plays a critical role in various higher neurological functions gaya ng planning movement, motivation, our memory, rewards, like yung pinakita kanina sa video na kapag nag-bell, tumatatak dun sa dog na ang ibig sabihin nun, kakain na siya kasi yun yung reward na binibigay. So learning, emotions, and romantic exchanges. Another part is the putamen. So the putamen is involved in learning and motor control naman, kagaya ng speech natin, language functions, reward, cognitive functioning, and addiction. So research has noted putamenal dysfunctions in various motor and cognitive dysfunctions, namely Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, Alzheimer, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, Wilson disease, and autism. Two of those will be explained earlier. So studies have shown that yung cells sa putamen, they help to determine the direction of muscle movements, particularly sa limbs natin. So, yung cells na yon involved sila in coordinating the purpose of movement rather than activating individual muscles to carry out the movements. So, another part na nandyan sa picture is the globus pallidus. So, the globus pallidus, ang main function niya is to control conscious and proprioceptive movements. So, the globus pallidus seems to play a role in maintaining muscle tone throughout the body. Kapag na-damage ang globus pallidus, it will result in a condition known as dystonia. So dystonia ay condition kung saan ang muscles loses their tone. and have difficulties executing commands sent to them from the brain. So, nahihirapang gumalaw yung muscles. Okay, putamen and globus pallidus, kapag pinagsama sila, yung may circle na yan, ang tawag sa kanya ay lenticular nucleus. Next part is the substantia nigra. As you can see in the picture, the substantia nigra is the brown one sa ilalim. So, the substantia nigra is Latin for black substance. Kasi yung substantia nigra, kapag tiningnan nyo siya, sinearch siya sa internet, dark talaga yung appearance niya kaysa dun sa mga katabi. So, dun niya nakuha yung pangalan niya. So, reason for color of the substantia nigra is the cells that make neuromelanin, which is like the melanin na nagbibigay ng color sa skin natin, ay nandun present siya sa substantia nigra, kaya ganun yung kulay niya. Substantia nigra also makes dopamine. So the substantia nigra sends up dopamine up to the basal ganglia. And as we all know, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which means kapag nagkulang ang cells ng dopamine sa substantia nigra, so mababawasan siya na nagre-result sa depression kasi 'di ba ang dopamine ay happy hormone. So, yun. Kapag kulang siya sa substantia nigra, doon nagkakaroon ng depression ng isang tao. So, another part is the subthalamic nucleus. So, the subthalamic nucleus is a lens-shaped cell group that makes up the largest part of the subthalamus. So, it is oval-shaped, gencephalic structure located ventrally to the thalamus, playing a fundamental role in the circuitry of the basal ganglia. So the last part is the nucleus accumbens. So the nucleus accumbens is considered as the neural interface between motivation and action, playing a key role on feeding, sexual, reward, stress-related, drug self-administration behaviors, and etc. So we should remember that the ventral striatum, which is yung nasa harap, it is made up of nucleus accumbens and olfactory tubercle. So yung olfactory tubercle is a multisensory processing center that is contained within the olfactory cortex and ventral striatum and plays a role in reward cognition. So the other one is the dorsal striatum, which is yung nasa likod. Yun naman ay yung putamen at yung caudate nucleus. So, question. If parts of basal ganglia gets injured, what will happen? Kahit isa man sa kanila yung ma-injure, anong mangyayari? So, a person can have tremors, change in posture, which is yung change ng shape ng body nila, change in mood, kagaya nga ng sabi ko kanina, kapag yung nagkulang ng cells sa dopamine, sa substantia nigra, nagkaka-depression. Changes of tone, loss of smell, slower movements, hard time controlling movement, and changes in sleeping patterns. So, ano nga ba ang mangyayari? Anong magiging sakit ng tao kapag nagkaroon ng damage ang kanyang basal ganglia? So, a perfect example of that is the Parkinson's disease. So, Parkinson's is the most notorious disease of the basal ganglia. So, kapag na-damage yung substantia nigra, which is a part of the basal ganglia, which is in the midbrain, kapag nag-decrease yung number of neurons, ayun, may Parkinson's na yung tao. Another symptom na makikita is bradykinesia. Ibig sabihin ng bradykinesia, bumabagal yung galaw ng tao. Resting tremor, kagaya ng sabi ko kanina, postural instability, and shuffling gait. So, isa sa example niyan ay yung makikita natin sa susunod na video, pill rolling tremor. Take note na yung matanda na makikita natin sa video, his hands, particularly his hand, is at rest, pero nagkakaroon ng tremor.
So that was an example of a pill-rolling tremor seen in patients with Parkinson's disease. It's seen at rest and it's typically seen in patients over the ages.
Huntington's disease is a hyperkinetic movement disorder. Loss of neurons din siya, kaya lang sa Parkinson's, loss of neurons siya in the substantia nigra. Dito naman, sa caudate nucleus. So ito tends to occur later in life. Kagaya nga na sinabi ko kanina, hereditary siya. So, increase in number in involuntary movements. And as the disease progresses, it tends to do changes to mood, personality, cognitive function, which is cognitive function is kung yung ability natin to learn. So there is a cognitive decline na nagli-lead siya sa dementia. So some people say, sa mga videos na napanood ko ng mga pamilya na may member of the family na may Huntington's disease, some people say it's the most cruel disease kasi hindi siya nagsho-show until someone has a family most of the time. Nagsho-show siya kapag may pamilya na yung tao, tapos may anak na. So may possibility na napas na siya dun sa children kasi nga hereditary siya. So a child has 50% chance of getting the disease when one parent has it. Another disease based on my research is kapag na-damage yung basal ganglia is the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. So ADHD is associated with abnormally low levels of neurotransmitters transmitting between the prefrontal cortical area and the basal ganglia. So dopamine and noradrenaline. So dopamine is closely associated with reward centers in the brain and also interacts with other potent neurotransmitters to regulate mood. So ano nga ba yung ADHD for our awareness? So these are the examples from DOH, mga sintomas ng pagkakaroon ng ADHD, nahihirapang mag-focus o mag-concentrate. Yun yung typical na like main symptom para malaman kung may ADHD ka, nahihirapang mag-focus o mag-concentrate. I follow a YouTuber from America who is diagnosed with ADHD and kapag isa sa pinakamahirap para sa kanya is kung meron sa inyong mahilig mag-bake or kahit yung pagsasaing na gumagamit kayo ng measuring cup. For example, kailangan ng 6 cups of water. Hindi niya kayang kumpletuhin yung 6 cups kasi hindi siya makapag-focus dun sa pagbibilang kasi maraming tumatakbo sa isip niya. Ang kwento niya, kapag nagbe-bake siya and kailangan ng 3 cups of flour, 1 cup pa lang siya, naiisip niya na kung, ay, napatay ko ba yung tubig? Oo nga pala, may gagawin pa akong ganito. Oo nga pala, hindi ko ito nagawa kagabi, mag-edit pa ako, ganyan-ganyan. So, nakakalimutan niya na kung pang ilang number na siya. So, yun. Another symptom is nahihirapan na express ang sarili, hindi mapakali, palaging malilimutin, at madaling mairita. So, as you can see in the comic, so this girl has ADHD. So, I have a hard time keeping thoughts in my head. Okay, let's see what time is it. 4 p.m. And then a few seconds, tatanong niya ulit sa sarili niya, what time is it? Okay, 4 p.m. Ano nga ulit? Or remembering kung ano yung nabasa niya. Or remembering her phone number or what she wanted to order. I forget words for basic things. Another symptom kagaya nito. You want one of those purple tomato things? You don't know what an eggplant is? I do. I just forgot the name for it. So makakalimutin din sila. This is another illustration of the two sides of ADHD. So, I've always had trouble focusing on paperwork and homework, but I can spend hours without break hyper-focusing on games and hobbies. So, kapag nakapag-focus sila sa isang bagay, hindi na nila namamalayan yung oras. And like, kapag talagang nag-focus sila sa isang bagay, magagawa na nila yon. For example, working. Hindi mo mamamalayan yung oras. Like, for example, you allot 1 hour lang ako magagawa sa project na to. tas mamamalayan mo gabi na. Another one is, my behavior as a kid was pretty unremarkable apart from my excessive talking in class, hyperactivity. Last week we had a cat and it's gray and I'm gonna call it Luna. And then, so it took 28 years and almost getting fired from my job to get me diagnosed. Another is, yung cutting people off pag may kausap. Like for example, nag-uusap kayo and then may sinabi siyang word na parang nagpaalala sa'yo ng isang bagay na kailangan mo siya agad ikwento kasi makakalimutan mo siya. So yung cut people off. Another is, I can be loud and hyperactive, but most of the time I'm pretty quiet. I can appear unusually slow because of my racing thoughts. Kasi nga, kagaya nung sabi niya na nung hindi pa siya nadadiagnose ng ADHD, akala niya normal lang sa isang tao yung maraming iniisip at the same time. Like, magsasaing nga pala ako, ay maglalaba din ako, ay yung assignment sa ganito, ay yung assignment sa ganyan. Hindi kayang mag-isip ng isang topic lang. And then when she was diagnosed with ADHD, doon niya nalaman na hindi pala normal yun. Na ang normal pala, kayang ng taong mag-isip ng isang bagay lang na doon siya mag-focus. So, ano nga ba yung back tayo sa Huntington's disease? So, this is a video that shows what Huntington's disease is.
Huntington's disease, or HD, is a rare neurodegenerative disease with symptoms of ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease, all happening simultaneously. About 30,000 people in the US have it, which is roughly 6 out of every 100,000. HD is hereditary. A child has a 50% chance of inheriting the disease from a parent who carries the mutation. The disease is caused by a mutant gene. Symptoms typically start showing between the ages of 30 and 50. The mutation that causes the disease occurs in the HTT gene, which contains the instructions for making a protein called huntingtin. In the normal blueprint for the protein, there are up to 35 repeats of the letters CAG. But in a person with HD, the blueprint contains too many repetitions. The protein becomes too long and folds into a different shape. Though all cells have the huntingtin protein, it is only in the neurons of the brain that the mutation causes trouble, specifically in the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia have multiple movement-related functions and are most often linked to the initiation and execution of movements. In HD patients, the basal ganglia are much smaller. This progressive damage in the neurons of the basal ganglia affects an individual's ability to walk, reason, and speak. Patients are likely to die from HD-related complications 10 to 25 years after symptoms first appear. Although there is no cure for HD, treatments are available to help manage symptoms, and researchers are pursuing potential treatments to slow or stop its course.
We need to remember that the basal ganglia is all about connections. So if these connections can't be made, the basal ganglia cannot work properly. So what do I mean by connections? So, kagaya nung pinapakita dito sa slide na to, if hindi magka-connect yung dalawang yon, magkakaroon siya ng damage ang basal ganglia. Hindi siya mag-work ng properly. Based on my research, nakakita pa ako ng ilang diseases na best describes kung anong mangyayari kapag hindi nakakonect ng properly or hindi magawa tong connections na to. So, Tourette syndrome, also known as Tourette's, is a neurological disorder characterized by sudden, repetitive, rapid, and unwanted movements or vocal sounds called tics. So, isa siya sa mga group of disorders of the developing nervous system called tic disorders. Tourette syndrome has been shown to have a significant neurological basal ganglia component, which manifests as a sudden, repetitive, uncontrolled movement and vocalization called tics. So motor tics are cardinal feature of Tourette syndrome and are traditionally associated with an excess of striatal dopamine in the basal ganglia. Recent evidence increasingly supports a more articulated view where cerebellum and cortex, working closely in concert with basal ganglia, are also involved in tic production. So meron tayong example of motor tics seen with people with Tourette syndrome. So Number 1 is yung simple motor tics. Simple motor tics is yung eye blinking, other eye movements, facial grimacing, shoulder shrugging, and head or shoulder jerking. So itong mga to, hindi nila to nakokontrol. These are involuntary movements. Number 2 is yung complex motor tics naman. Complex motor tics naman is yung pinagsama-samang facial grimacing, na may kasamang head twist and shoulder shrug, o kaya naman sniffing or touching objects, hopping, jumping, bending, or twisting. If some of you are fans of Billie Eilish has Tourette syndrome. Kapag tinignan niyo yung iba niyang interviews, makikita niyo sa YouTube kapag sinearch niyo. Sa mga interviews niya, nagkakaroon siya ng tics. Madalas eye movements, and then facial grimacing, and then shoulder shrugging. Yun madalas yung kanya. This is an example.
Zed, he said, she said. Zed. Little bitches. Sorry. Ma. So that was the ABC challenge. You can probably tell it's very draining, so I'm probably gonna have a nap.
Sabi ko kanina, repetitive, rapid, and unwanted movements. So yung mga ginagawa niya kanina, ang tawag doon, tics. So, ginagaya niya yung mga sinasabi, and then, yun nga, hindi niya din makontrol yung kamay niya, nahahampas niya yung camera, nahahampas niya yung mom niya. And kagaya nga nung sabi niya, draining talaga siya. Kasi hindi mo siya makontrol, so nakakapagod talaga siya. So, ito yung mga motor tics. Motor tics, ibig sabihin, sa galaw talaga siya. Pero may isa pang example ng types ng tics, which is yung vocal naman, or phonic. Yan. Example of vocal or phonic tics seen in people with Tourette syndrome. So, yung simple vocal tics, yung repetitive throat clearing, sniffing, barking, or grunting sounds. Kapag naman complex siya, repeating one's word or phrases. O kaya, for example, may sinabi siya, tapos sasabihin niya uli. O kaya naman, kapag may kausap siya, tapos may sinabi, uulitin niya yung sinabi. Ang tawag doon, echolalia. Sunod naman, yung paggamit ng vulgar, obscene, or swear words, ang tawag naman doon, coprolalia. So some of the most dramatic and disabling tics may include motor movements that result in self-harm, such as punching oneself in the face, or vocal tics, such as echolalia or swearing. Bago pa ako nakapag-decide na sa psychology ako magbe-major, interested na talaga ako sa Tourette syndrome kasi I have come across a documentary of the worst case of Tourette's in Australia. After nun, nag-research na ako ng research kasi interesting talaga siya. Alam niyo ba na may mga bata na nadadiagnose ng tics? ng Tourette syndrome. Earliest, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 3 years old. And sobrang hirap na hirap sila na yung parents, nagpapagawa sila ng t-shirt na may nakalagay sa likod na keep calm, I have Tourette's. Kasi yung mga bata, imagine 4 years old. Kapag nagpupunta sila sa restaurant, hindi nila mapigilang magmura. So, they have coprolalia. Hindi mo mapipigil yon. And syempre, yung mga tao, hindi sila aware na may ganong syndrome. hindi sila aware, akala nila sinasadya yun ng mga bata. So, nadja-judge yung magulang, umiiyak yung mga magulang kasi hindi naman yung ginusto ng anak nila, ganyan. So, mahirap talaga siya. Imagine, ganun yung nangyayari. Another one is yung self-harm, yung punching oneself in the face. So, this is an example. Ito din yung babae kanina. If you want to follow her, ang pangalan her name's Evie, pero ang pangalan ng YouTube channel niya ay This Trippy Hippie. So, nandun lahat ng mas magiging aware kayo sa Tourette's. So, di ba nagkaroon ng pandemic? Dahil nagkaroon ng pandemic, na-isolate siya, so lalo siyang hindi nasanay sa mga tao. Nung medyo lumuwag na, nag-grocery sila ng kaibigan niya, and this is what happened.
We're currently shopping and I'm very vocal today. I'm getting stared at like a lot. Do we need any ketchup? Oh. So loud. What am I doing?
This is the awful, confronting reality of Tourette syndrome for Bianca Sayers. This 16-year-old has the most severe case of Tourette's in Australia. And it's brutal watching her. Even with her parents, John and Lee, trying to restrain her tics.
Have a better life. Oh, I'm sorry, Mum. Okay. It's alright, darling.
Welcome to our home. Thank you.
Home under siege,
as you can see.
For this proud Queensland cop, the impact of living with Tourette's is most easily understood in the battered family home. Every door, every wall has Bianca's mark. This house has been patched up many times, but now John and Lee are resorting to reinforcing it with steel. And the bathroom has to be seen to be believed.
So you can see this is where most of her frustration happens, straight through the top.
Ng mga tic triggers. So, tics are often worse with excitement or anxiety. Better during calm and focused activities. So, kapag sobra yung emotions ng isang tao with Tourette's, lalong lumalala yung tics na trigger siya. For example, anxious siya kasi magre-report, for example. So, mas lumalala yung tics. Kapag calm sila, medyo kokonti lang sila. So, for example, kagaya rin ng mga pinapanood ko na nasa YouTube na merong mga Tourette's. Kapag merong tao silang makakasalamuha or makakausap, for example, interview, na first time makikita yung tics nila, lalong natitrigger kasi kinakabahan, natatakot, baka mahusgahan. So, certain physical experiences can trigger also and worsen tics. For example, tight collars kapag sobrang higpit, it can trigger neck tics. Or yung tumatabingi yung ulo, ganon. Hearing another person sniff or clear the throat may trigger similar sounds, so ginagaya. So tics do not go away during light sleep, pero they go away completely in deep sleep. So kagaya nga nung sabi ko kanina, si Billie Eilish, di ba may Tourette siya? And all the other YouTubers na pina-follow ko na may Tourette's, sinasabi nila na kapag kumakanta, nawawala yung tics completely. So kaya, baka kasi sabihin nyo na, si Billie Eilish may Tourette's, paano siya nakakanta ganyan? Nawawala siya kapag may kapag kumakanta. So, ito example nito si Evie ulit, yung nasa grocery. Makikita natin na lalong lumala yung text niya kasi kagaya nga nung sabi niya kanina, pinagtitinginan na siya ng mga tao.
I'm sure this woman is scared of me. Hi. Well done. A lot of people, I think, are frightened because I startle them. Like I make people jump.
Albert Einstein, which is nothing happens until something moves. So, ang explanation ko naman dyan, generally in life, 'di ba? Wala namang mangyayari kung hindi ka kikilos eh. 'Di ba? Kahit na konti lang 'yan, kahit na I believe in the saying na if every day you improve yourself kahit 0.10%, after 5 years, hindi mo mamamalayan ang laki na ng improvement mo. And most of the time, with our report, marirealize natin na sobrang tinitake for granted natin yung movements, yung body natin, yung movements natin. Kasi di ba pag may gusto kang ituturo mo lang. Tataas mo yung kamay mo ganyan, tataas mo, tas ibababa mo. Di ba? Pero may mga taong hindi nila kayang gawin yun. People with Parkinson's disease, people with Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's, dementia. Alam niyo, tinitake for granted natin madalas yung mga bagay na meron tayo kasi hindi naman natin alam na may mga taong wala pala nun. So now that we all know, di ba, we need to take care of our body. We should be thankful to our body kasi nagagawa niya lahat. We are privileged enough to have that, 'di ba? And we should love our body kasi it's the only one we're ever gonna get naman eh. Kasi kaya we should